Welcome back to the Anti-Cancer Lab. If you're new here, pull up a chair, you are in good company. This is where I read the cancer studies most people never see and tell you, plainly, what they actually mean for your plate. No fear, no hype, no miracle promises. So grab that coffee, settle in, and let's look at this one together. Because today we separate the real evidence from the noise, and I'll warn you up front, there is a lot of noise on this particular topic. Quick note before we go any further. I'm Dr. Becker. I'm a researcher, not your physician, and I want to be clear about what that means. I have never had cancer, I have never treated a patient, and nothing I say here is medical advice. What I do is take published studies and translate them into plain English for general education. So take whatever's useful from today, and please bring it to the people who are actually caring for you. Your oncologist, your GP, your care team, they are the ones with your chart in front of them. I just read the papers. Now, I changed my mind on today's topic, let me show you why. For a long time, I'd look at the garlic studies and think, well, the association is weak, the trial data is murkier still, this one doesn't really hold up. And then I went back and looked more carefully at the mechanism, the actual chemistry of what happens inside a garlic clove when you crush it, and I realized the evidence isn't weak so much as it's being applied wrong. Almost everyone who dismisses garlic hasn't looked at the preparation question. Almost everyone who oversells it hasn't looked at the trial data. I was guilty of the first. The internet is guilty of the second. Today I want to give you the complete, honest picture, because you deserve it, and because there's a genuinely useful habit hiding inside this research that costs you absolutely nothing. Here's the thing I keep seeing online. A clove of garlic next to big letters that say something like, "This kills cancer," or "1 clove a day keeps it away forever," and every time that image crosses my screen I think, those two things don't line up. On one side you have the internet handing you a miracle. On the other side you have the actual published literature sitting on my desk, and it is telling a much quieter, much more honest story. The gap between them is exactly what I want to walk you through today, because something real is buried in this research. It's just not what the photo is selling. So let me say the direct part first. Garlic does not cure cancer. A clove a day is not a shield. If you take one thing from today, take that, because anyone showing you that photo is overselling you. I'll tell you what I'd actually put on my own plate in a few minutes, and it does involve garlic, but not because of magic. Because of something small and specific that most people get completely wrong the moment they pick up a knife. Let's start with what the population research actually shows, because there is something real here and I don't want to bury it. Garlic belongs to a family of vegetables called the Allium family. Allium is just the botanical name for the whole pungent, eye-watering group. Garlic, onions, leeks, shallots, chives. And when researchers look at large populations and compare the people who eat a lot of these allium vegetables against the people who eat almost none, a pattern keeps showing up for one cancer in particular, stomach cancer. The medical word is gastric. Gastric simply means stomach. Across multiple large observational studies, people eating more garlic and onions tend to have lower rates of gastric cancer. That signal is real, and it has been seen consistently enough that serious cancer researchers pay attention to it. But I have to slow you down, right? Here, because this is precisely where the internet runs straight off a cliff. What I just described is an association. An association means two things tend to show up together in a population. It does not prove that one caused the other. The people who eat a lot of fresh garlic and onions are often also the people cooking more meals from scratch, eating a wider variety of vegetables overall, possibly smoking less, possibly living in regions where the food supply looks different from top to bottom. So when I say more garlic, lower stomach cancer rates, I am describing a link researchers have consistently observed, not a proven, isolated, one-on-one cause and effect. Let me say that more carefully, because it genuinely matters. The bulb is associated with lower risk in these studies. The bulb is not proven to lower your personal risk on its own in isolation. That is a real and important difference, and the headlines erase it every single time. And I'll be straight about how strong the evidence grade actually is, because you deserve the real grade and not a marketing grade. The World Cancer Research Fund and the American Institute for Cancer Research, these are the large, independent expert panels that methodically review all the diet and cancer research they have looked at garlic and stomach cancer specifically. And their verdict is that the evidence is limited. That is their word. Limited means there is a signal worth paying attention to, but it is not strong enough for these panels to stand up and declare that garlic prevents stomach cancer. So when you see a video announcing that this is settled science, that person is standing well ahead of the actual scientists. I would rather be honest and a step behind the hype than confident and wrong. Before we go further, let me put one more honest thing on the table about how these population studies work, because it changes how you should hear everything else I say today. When researchers compare people who eat lots of allium against people who eat almost none, how do they actually measure that? They hand thousands of people a questionnaire and ask them to remember how often they ate garlic and onions over the last several years. And people are people. Memory is fuzzy. We tend to round up on the vegetables and round down on the less flattering things. So the measurement itself is soft, imprecise, subject to the limitations of human recall. That's a big part of why the expert panels land on limited rather than strong. I'm not telling you this to talk you out of garlic. I'm telling you so you hold the evidence at the right weight. This is a gentle signal seen through an imperfect lens, pointing mostly at the stomach. It is not a law of physics. Hold it that lightly, and you will never be fooled by the photo. So why am I even talking about it if the evidence is only limited? I know what some of you are thinking right now. Here we go again. Another food, another maybe, another researcher telling me to eat something because of a signal that might mean nothing. That is a completely reasonable thing to think, and I want you to hold on to that skepticism, because it protects you. So let me earn the next few minutes. The reason I take this one seriously enough to bring to you is the mechanism. There is actual well-understood chemistry inside a garlic clove, and once you understand it, you will immediately see why the way almost everyone prepares garlic throws the whole potential benefit straight into the trash. This is the practical piece. This is the part worth your time. And unlike the fuzzy population data, the chemistry is not uncertain at all. This part we know cold. Here it is. The sharp, biologically active compound that researchers get excited about in garlic is called allicin. Allicin, A-L-L-I-C-I-N. And here is the thing, almost nobody tells you. Allicin is not sitting inside the clove waiting for you. It does not exist yet in the intact bulb. A whole unbroken clove of garlic contains two separate things, held apart from each other, like chemicals in two separate jars. One is a compound called alliin. That's the raw material. The other is an enzyme called alliinase. An enzyme is just a biological tool that builds or breaks other molecules. And alliinase has one job, which is to convert alliin into allicin. But in the intact, undamaged clove, these two are kept apart in different cellular compartments. Nothing happens as long as the clove is whole. The only way to bring them together is to break the clove. Crush it, chop it, mince it, press it. The moment you damage those cells, the enzyme alliinase rushes into contact with the alliina and begins converting it into allicin, the compound we actually care about. And that reaction is not instantaneous. It doesn't finish the second your knife makes contact. The conversion builds and largely completes over roughly 10 minutes. Give it that time, and you've allowed the chemistry to run its course. Let me give you a physical picture for that, because it's much easier to hold than the biochemistry. Think of an intact clove of garlic like a book of matches, where the striker strip has been torn off and kept in a separate room. All the matches are there. Everything you need is present, but nothing is going to light because the two parts have been separated. Crushing the clove is what brings the striker back into the same room as the matches. And once the reaction gets going, once the allicin has formed, it is the sturdy part. It can tolerate some cooking heat reasonably well. But the enzyme alliinase is delicate. Heat destroys it quickly. So if you crush the clove and throw it immediately into a screaming hot pan, you have killed the striker before the matches had a chance to light. You burned up the one tool that was building the compound you wanted before it had time to build much of anything. Matches first, then fire. Crush first, rest 10 minutes, then cook. That is the whole idea, and it costs you nothing. Now watch what this means for the average kitchen, because this is where I see the mistake happen every single time, including in my own kitchen before I understood this. Here is the sequence most people follow. They chop the garlic And then within seconds, sometimes literally seconds, they scrape it off the cutting board and into the hot oil. What just happened? The alliinase enzyme was destroyed by the heat before it had time to produce meaningful amounts of allicin. You did the thoughtful thing. You bought fresh garlic, you chopped it yourself, and then 4 seconds of high heat undid the whole point of it. Let me back up and say it as a rule you can post on your fridge. Crush it, wait 10 minutes, then cook it. And when you do cook it, add it toward the end of the cooking time rather than the very beginning. Not the last 5 seconds, it still needs some time in the pan to soften and flavor the food. But garlic that goes in halfway through or in the final few minutes is exposed to far less cumulative heat than garlic that's been sitting in hot oil since the start. Crush, rest, cook late, that's the habit. I'll tell you what I actually do, because I'm not going to suggest anything I don't practice myself. When I'm making a sauce or sautéing any kind of greens, the garlic is the first thing I chop and the last thing that goes into the pan. I crush a couple of cloves with the flat of the knife, fine hauja, them, and then I set the hauja side of the board and go do everything else. Dice the onion, measure whatever else I'm using, get the pan going. By the time the pan is ready and the other things are in, the garlic has had its 10 minutes and the chemistry has had time to run. Then it goes in late. And I want to be careful and fair here about the pre-minced jar and garlic powder, because a lot of people rely on those, and I'm not going to pretend they're worthless. They're convenient, they add genuine flavor, and for a lot of households, that jar in the fridge door gets used when a fresh bulb would just sit and go soft. I understand that. But the pre-minced jar has typically been sitting for a long time, the enzyme activity has faded considerably, and the garlic has been exposed to oxygen and often heat during processing. The powder has been heat processed and dried. For culinary flavor, both are fine. For the specific compound we're talking about today, fresh crushed cloves given 10 minutes to rest are what the research is actually pointing at. Use the jar when life demands it. Know what you're trading. Now the second way to get it, and it's even simpler, no pan required at all, raw. If you take that crushed, rested garlic and stir it directly into a salad dressing, or mash it into a little olive oil and lemon to spread on bread, or fold it into a yogurt dip, no heat ever touches it, nothing is destroyed. Raw crushed garlic, prepared that way, is honestly the cleanest route to keeping the allicin intact. I know raw garlic is assertive. 1 clove crushed into a full bowl of salad dressing is plenty for several servings. You don't need to eat it like a piece of fruit. A little, prepared right, mixed into food you're already eating, is the realistic version. Which brings me to the broader Allium family, because garlic doesn't stand alone in those population studies. Remember I said it was people eating more Allium vegetables across the board who showed lower stomach cancer rates, garlic and onions together, not garlic in isolation. And here's what I genuinely like about the onion from a practical standpoint. It's forgiving. Nobody is afraid of an onion. You'll happily eat a whole raw red onion in a salad where 3 raw cloves of garlic would feel like a challenge. So on the plate, the onion is the low-friction win. A raw red or white onion, thinly sliced into a salad, folded into a sandwich, diced fresh over a bowl of beans, or stirred into scrambled eggs before they set. Same principle as the garlic, the biologically active compounds in the Allium family are most concentrated in the raw and lightly cooked form. Long, hard frying mellows them out, which is exactly why a properly caramelized onion is sweet and gentle, while a raw one makes you reach for a tissue. Both are delicious. But if we're after the compounds that showed up in the studies, leaning toward the raw or barely cooked side more often is the smarter move. Cheapest vegetable in any supermarket, keeps for weeks in a cool, dry spot, no preparation technique required beyond a knife. There is genuinely no excuse not to have one on hand most weeks. And I'd encourage you not to overlook the softer members of this family either. Chives, snipped raw over a baked potato or a bowl of eggs. Scallions, green onions, sliced raw and scattered over a soup right before you eat it. Leeks in a stew, added late, so they don't cook to nothing. All allium, all part of the same biological story, and the raw or late addition habit applies to all of them the same way it does to garlic. Here's the honest picture of a realistic week. You are not going to eat raw garlic every single day, and you shouldn't pressure yourself to. But if fresh allium is showing up in your food on most days, crushed and rested garlic in your cooking a few times a week, a raw onion in your salads and sandwiches, chives on, Your eggs in the morning, you're living roughly the way the people in those large observational studies were living. That is the doable target, not a rigid clove a day ritual. Just fresh allium, prepared with some thought, woven through a normal week. Consistency over intensity, every time. Now I need to tell you something I can't skip, because I've watched well-meaning, genuinely scared people get themselves into trouble with this one. I sat with a fellow last winter, call him Dean retired, sharp, who had read one of those miracle posts and decided that if a little garlic was good, a great deal more must be far better. He'd started swallowing several raw cloves every morning on an empty stomach, and on top of that, he'd added a high-dose garlic supplement because his father had died of stomach cancer and Dean was frightened, and I understood that fear completely. But two things had gone wrong. First, his stomach was in real distress. Raw garlic on an empty belly is genuinely rough on your gastrointestinal tract. Second, and this is the more important point, garlic in high doses, and particularly concentrated garlic supplements, can meaningfully thin the blood. That is not a small footnote. If you are on a blood thinner, or you have a procedure coming up, that combination can create a real problem, and it is exactly the kind of thing that belongs in a conversation with your physician and your care team before you start. Dean didn't know that. Most people don't. So I'll say it directly. Food amounts of garlic worked into your normal cooking are one thing. High-dose garlic supplements are a different category entirely, and they belong in a conversation with your medical team alongside your care, never instead of it. And here is the honesty part that the miracle photo people will never show you. When researchers stopped simply watching what large populations ate and actually ran a controlled trial, giving people garlic supplements deliberately and tracking them prospectively, for years the results were, to be blunt, underwhelming. There is a large, serious trial that ran in Shandong province in China, a region with historically very high rates of stomach cancer. Researchers gave participants garlic supplements over a multi-year period and followed them carefully. In the main analysis, the garlic supplements did not clearly reduce the precancerous stomach changes the researchers were measuring. There were trends leaning in a hopeful direction, and after tracking these individuals for more than 2 decades, a faint signal did eventually surface in longer follow-up, but nowhere near the dramatic protective effect the observational studies had hinted at. When we watched people who ate a lot of garlic, they looked protected. When we tested garlic directly in a controlled experiment, the effect largely melted away. That is a humbling result, and I would be failing you if I glossed over it. There is one more honest piece to this story, and it is probably the most important piece I could tell you, because it reframes the whole conversation about stomach cancer specifically. A large proportion of gastric cancer doesn't begin with diet at all. It traces back to a bacterium called Helicobacter pylori H, pylori for short, a bug that can colonize the stomach lining and in some people drives the long, slow cellular damage that can eventually progress toward cancer. In that same Shandong research, the thing that clearly and powerfully moved the needle on stomach cancer outcomes wasn't the garlic. It was treating the H. pylori infection with antibiotics. That was the strong, unambiguous result. So if we're being genuinely truthful, some of garlic's reputation for the stomach may run partly through that bacterial pathway, and the biggest lever, there is a medical one, a test and a course of treatment, not a clove, which is a good reminder of where food sits in all of this. It's a helper, a reasonable part of a reasonable overall approach. It is not the whole story, and it is certainly not the strongest lever in the room. So let me pull the honest thread all the way through for you, because this is what the miracle photo can never do. Garlic is not a cure. None of what we talked about today is. A food does not kill cancer in your body the way a bold headline says it does. What the research on garlic actually looks like, at its most honest, is this: a small, sensible tilt of the odds, seen most clearly for the stomach, across large populations of people who eat fresh allium vegetables regularly, and only if they prepare it in a way that preserves the relevant chemistry, which almost nobody does. That is not a shield. That is being the safe driver rather than trying to buy a guarantee. And anyone selling you more than that is selling something. Now, here is a moment I want to be careful about, because I think I owe you a direct statement of what is actually at stake when you think about any of this. You have people in your life, maybe you yourself, who have heard the word cancer, and who are looking for something they can control, something they can do with their own hands that might matter. And that impulse is not foolish. It is completely human and completely reasonable. The plate is real, the habits are real, the mechanism we talked about today is real. Garlic prepared correctly, as part of a diet full of vegetables and fresh food, is a sensible thing. I would put it on my own plate, and I do, but I want you to hold it in proportion. It is one piece, a worthwhile piece, an evidence-adjacent piece, a piece that costs you nothing and adds flavor to your food. But a piece, not the whole answer, and not a replacement for your medical care, or your screening, or the conversation with your doctor about H. pylori. If that's relevant for you, take the lever you hold and use it well. And let your care team hold the levers they're trained for. So here's your one thing this week, and it really is free. You probably already buy garlic. The only change is your timing. This week, when you cook, cut your garlic first. Set it aside on the cutting board. Let it rest about 10 minutes while you do everything else in the kitchen. Then add it toward the end of cooking rather than the very start. That's the complete habit. Same garlic you already own, same grocery bill, one new step, and you've stopped discarding the one thing that might actually matter. If you want to go the raw route, crush a clove into your salad dressing and skip the pan entirely. Both work. Pick the one that fits how you actually cook. And let me put a realistic amount on it so you're not guessing. We're not talking about a heroic dose. A couple of fresh cloves worked into your meals a few times a week, plus a raw onion showing up in your salads and sandwiches regularly, is squarely within the range the observational studies were describing. That's the full picture. You don't need a supplement. You don't need to hold your nose and force anything unpleasant, and you don't need to do what Dean did. If you pick up one bulb of garlic and one onion at your next shop and prepare them the way we talked about, you are there. Anyone telling you that you need an expensive aged garlic capsule to get the benefit is skipping right past the fresh clove in the produce section that costs pennies and does the job better. You hold one lever every day, 3 times a day, and that's your plate. That is not nothing. You can't control everything about a diagnosis or a family history, nobody can. But you can control whether the garlic you already eat is prepared in a way that keeps its chemistry alive. You can control whether the Allium family shows up in your food most days of the week. And you can control whether the person guiding your bigger decisions is your doctor and your care team, not a photo on the internet. Do the small, doable thing, keep doing it, and bring the big questions to the people caring for you. That's the whole game. If you want the full plate-first version of all of this laid out, simply what to eat, how to prepare it, how much, how often I put it together in the Anti-Cancer Plate Guide, and there's a link waiting for you below whenever you're ready for it. And tell me in the comments, did you already know the 10-minute trick? Or is this the first you've heard of it? Drop a line below. I read every one of these and I genuinely learn from you. Keep it simple, keep it on your plate, and I'll see you right back here. Bring a friend who needs this.